I wasn't looking for a fresh start. I was forced into one. A breakup, a job transfer, and a sudden need for cheaper rent landed me in this sketchy apartment. It wasn't much, but it was all I could afford. At least, that's what I told myself when I signed the lease, without even a second tour. The building itself had an unsettling vibe, the kind you'd notice if you paid close attention. It wasn't run down, but it felt neglected. The hallways were dimly lit, and the walls carried faint marks, almost like scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. My new apartment was on the second floor, and it smelled faintly of mothballs and something else, something metallic. I tried not to think too much about it. Moving in was easy, since I didn't have much left after the breakup. Just a few boxes, some secondhand furniture, and a lot of baggage I didn't know how to unpack. That first night, I noticed it, the weird energy in the place. You know that feeling you get when you're sure someone's watching you, even though you're alone? I couldn't shake it. I tried to chalk it up to nerves or exhaustion, but something about the silence felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, like the air itself was watching me. The next morning, I decided to explore the apartment more. There was this old wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room that I hadn't paid much attention to. When I opened it, I found a journal inside. It wasn't anything fancy, just a beat-up old book with frayed edges, yellowed pages, and an ink stain on the cover. I figured it was something the previous tenant left behind, so I opened it. The first page stopped me cold. It read, "Rules for living here." At first, I laughed. Rules? What kind of landlord writes this stuff? But as I read on, my amusement faded. The rules weren't normal, nothing about them made sense. Rule number 1. Never leave food out after 9 p.m. Rule number 2. If you hear footsteps in the hall between 2 and 3 a.m., don't open the door. Rule number 3. Always knock twice before entering the bathroom. The more I read, the weirder it got. Rule number 6 mentioned something about shadows. If your shadow moves when you're standing still, leave the room immediately. I almost put the journal down then. It had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe a tenant with a twisted sense of humor trying to freak out the next renter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the rules weren't just instructions. They were warnings. The second night was when it started. I'd been too tired to do much cleaning, so I left an open pizza box on the kitchen counter. Around 9:01 p.m., I heard it, scratching. Not the kind of scratching you'd hear from a mouse or a raccoon, but something deliberate, persistent. It sounded like claws dragging against wood, coming from inside the kitchen. My first thought was, it's just in my head, but the scratching grew louder, then turned into thudding, like something was trying to get out. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the journal and reread rule number 1. Never leave food out after 9 p.m. I ran to the kitchen, threw the pizza box into the trash, and slammed the lid shut. Instantly, the noises stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. It was like the air had thickened, pressing down on me. I didn't sleep much that night. By the fourth night, I was convinced there was something wrong with the apartment. I woke up at 2:45 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, deliberate. My heart was pounding as I sat up in bed. I wanted to check, but then rule number 2 flashed in my mind. If you hear footsteps, don't open the door. I froze, listening as the steps grew louder, and stopped directly outside my door. Whoever or whatever it was didn't knock or try to come in. Instead, I heard breathing. Shallow, raspy breathing, like someone or something was waiting for me to make a move. I didn't dare to breathe, let alone move. I sat there clutching the journal, praying for the sound to go away. After what felt like hours, the breathing stopped, and when I finally looked through the peephole at sunrise, the hallway was empty. By the end of the week, I knew the journal wasn't a joke. These weren't just rules, they were survival tips. The last entry chilled me to my core. If you see the man in the mirror, leave immediately. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't want to find out. That night, I tried to avoid the bathroom altogether, but eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I went in, flicked on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. Everything seemed normal at first, until it didn't. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadowy figure standing behind me in the reflection. My blood ran cold. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I didn't pack. I didn't grab my keys or my phone. I just ran. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. Whatever's in that apartment can keep the journal and everything else I left behind. Maybe you think I imagined it. Stress, sleep deprivation, paranoia, it's possible, right? But you didn't hear the scratching. You didn't feel the air turn heavy. You didn't hear the breathing outside your door. And you didn't see the man in the mirror. Some rules are there to save you. Ignore them at your own risk.